I was sitting in my car outside Cypress Lawn Cemetery, engine off, windows up, watching the fog roll in from the Pacific. 7 days. It had been exactly 7 days since we'd buried Robert in Plot 247, Section C, beneath the old oak tree he'd chosen himself 3 years ago. When the time comes, he'd said that afternoon, standing under its branches, I want somewhere with a view of the bay, somewhere peaceful. The funeral program was still on the passenger seat, cream-colored cardstock with his photo from our 40th anniversary party. Robert James Henderson, 1950 to 2024. Beloved husband, father, and friend. The words felt too small for 34 years of marriage, too thin to hold the weight of a life lived. I should have gone home. The house would be getting cold, and I'd left the kitchen light on again. But something kept me in that parking lot, hands still gripping the steering wheel, watching the last of the afternoon light fade through the cypress trees. Going home meant facing the empty chair at the dinner table, the untouched bottle of Macallan Scotch on the sideboard, his reading glasses still folded on the nightstand where he'd left them the night before his heart attack. My phone buzzed in my purse. I almost ignored it. Most of the condolence calls had finally stopped, but some instinct made me reach for it. A text from Amanda, my daughter-in-law, Patrick's wife of 11 years. Family dinner tonight, 6 p.m. Don't be late. No. How are you holding up? No. Let us know if you need anything. Just a command delivered with the casual authority Amanda had perfected over the years. The same tone she used when reorganizing my kitchen cabinets or explaining why Patrick couldn't make it to Sunday dinners anymore. I stared at those words, don't be late, and felt something shift in my chest. Not grief exactly, something colder. But I texted back, I'll be there, because that's what I did. That's what I'd always done. The drive home took 15 minutes through the familiar streets of Pacific Heights. My neighborhood hadn't changed much in 32 years. The same Victorian painted ladies lined the streets, their pastel facades perfect against the San Francisco sky. The same boutiques and cafes on Fillmore Street, though the prices had tripled since Robert and I had moved here in 1992. Back then, we'd barely been able to afford the down payment on the house. It had needed everything new: plumbing, electrical work, a complete kitchen renovation. But Robert had seen its bones, its potential. Sarah, he'd said, standing in the gutted living room that first day, we're going to build our life here. Everything we want. Everything we deserve. And we had. Room by room, year by year. He'd refinished the hardwood floors himself, spent weekends stripping wallpaper and repainting crown molding. I'd chosen every light fixture, every doorknob, every paint color. The kitchen we'd renovated when Patrick was in high school, Carrara marble countertops that I'd saved for 2 years to afford. The garden I'd cultivated in the back where roses climbed the fence and lavender spilled over the stone pathway. This house wasn't just where we lived. It was the physical manifestation of our marriage. Every room held a memory: Patrick's first steps in the hallway Christmas mornings by the fireplace, quiet Sunday breakfasts at the kitchen table while rain pattered against the windows. I pulled into the driveway at 5:47 p.m., 13 minutes to get dinner ready. But when I walked through the front door, I smelled garlic and rosemary. Cooking. Amanda was in my kitchen. Sarah, there you are? Amanda looked up from the stove, wooden spoon in hand, as if this were perfectly normal. As if she hadn't let herself into my house, used my ingredients, taken over my space. I hope you don't mind, I thought I'd get dinner started. You've been so overwhelmed and I wanted to help. She was wearing what she always wore, expensive athleisure that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect ponytail, her makeup flawless even at the end of a workday. She looked like she'd stepped out of a Lululemon catalog. That's thoughtful, I managed. You didn't have to. Oh, it's no trouble. I made a chicken cacciatore, Patrick's favorite. She turned back to the stove, stirring. Why don't you set the table? Patrick should be here any minute. I stood there in my own kitchen, still wearing my coat, clutching my purse, and realized I'd been dismissed. In my own home. But I set down my purse and started pulling plates from the cabinet, the good china, the set Robert and I had received as a wedding gift. My hands were shaking slightly, though I couldn't say exactly why. Patrick arrived at 6:03, already loosening his tie as he walked in the door. My son, 44 years old now, with Robert's height and build, but softer somehow. He'd put on weight in recent years, and there were new lines around his eyes, a weariness that made him look older than he was. Mom, he gave me a quick one-armed hug, the kind that suggested obligation rather than affection. He smelled like coffee, and something else, stress maybe, exhaustion. How are you doing? Dinner's ready, Amanda called from the kitchen before I could answer. We sat at the dining room table, the mahogany table that had hosted every holiday dinner, every birthday celebration, every important family conversation for 3 decades. I sat in my usual spot. Patrick took his father's chair without seeming to notice what he'd done. Amanda had made too much food the way people do when they're performing hospitality rather than offering it. Chicken roasted vegetables, a salad fresh bread. She served us with efficient movements, narrating as she went. I used that recipe from the Times Remember Patrick, the one we made for that dinner party last month. Sarah, there's a lemon vinaigrette on the salad. I hope that's okay. I know you usually just use balsamic, but I thought we could try something different. In my house, at my table. It's lovely, I said quietly. Thank you. We ate in near silence. Patrick checked his phone twice, answering texts with quick thumbs. Amanda made small talk about her work, something about a new client at her marketing firm, a difficult creative director deadlines. I nodded and murmured appropriate responses, but inside I was somewhere else. I kept glancing at Robert's empty chair. Not the chair Patrick was sitting in, I couldn't bring myself to look at that, but the space where Robert's presence should have been. The air there felt different, hollow. The service was beautiful, wasn't it? I offered, trying to fill the silence. Your father would have loved seeing so many people there. Tom Riley drove up from San Jose, and the Goldmans sent that huge arrangement. Did you see the roses? Patrick looked up from his phone. Yeah, it was nice. Nice. His father's funeral was nice. Amanda set down her fork with deliberate precision. The sound of silver on china seemed too loud in the quiet room. Actually, Sarah, that's something we wanted to talk to you about. Something in her tone made my stomach clench. I looked between them, Amanda's composed expression, Patrick's careful avoidance of my eyes. What do you mean? I asked, though part of me already dreaded the answer. Amanda straightened in her chair, assuming a posture I'd seen before. The posture she used in business meetings when she was about to present a proposal she'd already decided you'd accept. Patrick and I have been talking, and we think it's time to discuss your living situation. Living situation. As if I were a problem to be solved, a logistical challenge. I don't understand, I said slowly. This is my home. Of course it is. Amanda's voice took on that saccharine sweetness people use when they're about to say something awful. But Sarah, it's a lot of house for one person. The maintenance alone, the property taxes in this neighborhood are astronomical, and you're not getting any younger. It's a 2-story Victorian. Those stairs, I've been managing these stairs for 32 years. But that's exactly the problem. She leaned forward, her face arranged in an expression of concern that didn't reach her eyes. You've been managing the house, managing the finances, managing everything. But now that Robert's gone, she trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Patrick finally spoke, his voice barely above a mumble. Mom, what Amanda's trying to say is that this house is going to be overwhelming for you. The upkeep, the expenses, it doesn't make sense for you to stay here alone. I'm not helpless, Patrick. My voice cracked despite my attempt to keep it steady. And this house, your father and I built our entire life here. Every room, every detail. You grew up here. Exactly. Amanda jumped back in, not missing a beat. You have so many memories here, and that's wonderful. But memories don't pay utility bills or property taxes. You need to be practical, Sarah. Practical. She wanted me to be practical about leaving the home I'd poured my heart into for 3 decades. What exactly are you suggesting? I asked, though I could feel the answer forming like ice in my stomach. Amanda glanced at Patrick, a quick look that seemed like a signal. He shifted uncomfortably but nodded slightly. We think you should look into senior living communities, Amanda said, pulling out her phone and scrolling to show me something. There are some really nice places in the East Bay, Walnut Creek, Pleasant Hill. They have activities, meal plans, people your own age. It would be so much better for you than rattling around in this big empty house. Senior living communities. She wanted to put me in a home, pack me up and send me away like furniture they didn't need anymore. I turned to Patrick, desperately searching his face for some sign that he disagreed, that he'd stand up for me, that he'd remember this was his mother sitting across from him. Patrick, you really think I should sell the house where you grew up, where your father and I— It makes sense, Mom. He interrupted, still not meeting my eyes. His gaze was fixed somewhere over my shoulder at the wall behind me. And honestly, Amanda and I could use the space. We've been talking about starting a family, and this house has so much potential." The words crashed over me like a wave of ice water. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted my house. The home Robert and I had lovingly restored room by room over 3 decades. The home where I'd raised Patrick, where Robert had died just 8 days ago. I opened my mouth to speak, but Amanda wasn't finished. "Now that Robert's dead," she said, her voice suddenly losing all pretense of warmth, "you need to grieve, pack your bags, and move on. 2 weeks should be enough time. That's more than generous." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway, the distant sound of traffic on Fillmore Street, my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Patrick looked up then, and for a moment, just a moment, I saw something flicker across his face. Uncertainty, maybe even guilt. But then he looked at Amanda, and I watched him make a choice. His jaw tightened, and he nodded. "The house was Dad's," he said quietly. "And now it's mine. You were just living here." Just living here. 34 years of marriage. 32 years in this house. Reduced to just living here as if I'd been a tenant, a guest, someone temporary who'd overstayed her welcome. I stared at my son, this man I'd carried for 9 months, nursed through midnight feedings, taught to tie his shoes and ride a bike. This man whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose nightmares I'd soothed, whose first heartbreak I'd helped him survive. I stared at him and realized I was looking at a stranger. "I see," I said quietly. My voice was steadier than I felt. Inside, something was breaking apart. Not just my heart, but my understanding of who my son was, who my family was, what any of it meant. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady. The room tilted slightly, or maybe it was just me. "I'll need some time to 2 weeks, Amanda cut me off. "That should be plenty of time to find a suitable place and arrange for movers. We can help you look at senior communities this weekend if you'd like. Get the process started." 2 weeks, not 2 months. Not even a reasonable timeline to grieve and plan. 2 weeks to dismantle a lifetime. Patrick finally looked directly at me, and what I saw there was worse than anger or hatred. It was indifference. Complete casual indifference to my pain. "It's for the best, Mom," he said as if he were convincing himself as much as me. "You'll see. Once you're settled somewhere more appropriate, you'll be happier. Less stress. Less responsibility. Less. He wanted to give me less. Less space. Less independence. Less life. I walked out of the dining room without another word, climbed the stairs, those stairs Amanda claimed I couldn't manage, to the bedroom I'd shared with Robert. Each step felt like climbing a mountain. The bedroom still smelled like him. His cologne faint, but there. Woodsy and warm. His reading glasses were still on the nightstand, folded next to the mystery novel he'd been reading. His robe still hung on the back of the bathroom door. I sat on the edge of our bed, my bed now, and stared at my reflection in the dresser mirror. The woman looking back seemed older than 72. Her silver hair was limp, her blue eyes dulled by shock and grief. In 2 weeks, I would have to leave this room where I'd said goodbye to Robert just 8 days ago. I would have to pack up 34 years of marriage into boxes and surrender it all to a son who'd just told me I'd never really belonged here anyway. But as I sat there in the gathering darkness, something else began to stir beneath the grief and shock. A small, hard kernel of something I hadn't felt in years. Anger, not the hot, explosive kind. Something colder, more focused. Robert had always been the one who handled our finances. He'd managed everything, the bills, the investments, the business. But he'd taught me to pay attention to details, to ask questions, to never sign anything I didn't understand. Tomorrow, I would start asking questions. Because if Patrick and Amanda thought they could just erase me from this family without consequence, they might be in for a surprise. The first thing I needed to do was understand exactly what Robert had left behind, and to whom. I couldn't sleep. Of course I couldn't sleep. At 2:17 a.m. I gave up trying, went downstairs in my robe, and made tea chamomile, the kind that's supposed to be calming but never actually works. The house was too quiet. Without Robert's soft snoring from the bedroom, without the familiar sounds of another person existing in the space, every creak of the floorboards seemed amplified. I found myself standing in the doorway of Robert's study teacup, warming my hands, looking at the room I'd barely entered in the past week. It felt wrong somehow to disturb his space, like crossing into a sacred place without permission. But I pushed the door open wider. The study was exactly as he'd left it. Mahogany desk with neat stacks of papers, his reading chair by the window where he'd spent countless evenings with law journals and case files. Bookshelves lined with legal texts, mystery novels, and the complete works of John Steinbeck. The room smelled like leather and old books, and him. I set down my tea and approached the desk. There was a calendar, one of those old-fashioned paper ones, with Robert's meticulous handwriting marking appointments, reminders, notes to himself. His fountain pen was uncapped, as if he'd been interrupted mid-sentence. I don't know what made me try the bottom drawer. It had always been locked, not suspiciously just locked. Robert kept client files there, sensitive documents. I'd never questioned it. But tonight my hand reached for it and it slid open. Not locked. Not anymore. Inside was a tackle box, the old green one from our first date when Robert had taken me fishing at Lake Merced, and I'd caught nothing but fallen completely in love with the earnest young law student who'd baited my hook and told terrible jokes all afternoon. Why was the tackle box in his desk drawer? I lifted it out, surprised by its weight. When I opened it, there were no lures or hooks inside, just a small brass key lying on top of a manila envelope. The envelope was labeled in Robert's handwriting, "For Sarah. Open after I'm gone." My hands were shaking as I picked it up. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind Robert used for important documents. I could feel something substantial inside paper's cards. I sat in his reading chair and turned on the lamp, held the envelope for a long moment, afraid of what it might contain. Finally, I opened it. Inside were a letter folded carefully in Robert's handwriting, 2 business cards, a sticky note, a list of numbers I didn't recognize. I looked at the business cards, first putting off the letter, putting off his words. Helen Patterson, branch manager, First National Bank, San Francisco, Margaret Sullivan, CPA, Morrison & Associates. Why would Robert leave me business cards? We'd been banking at First National for years, but I'd never met Helen Patterson. And Margaret Sullivan, that name was vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. The sticky note was in Robert's handwriting, that familiar scrawl, "Start with Helen. She knows everything. Trust the process. I love you. R." The list of numbers looked like account numbers, but I didn't recognize any of them. Finally, because I couldn't put it off any longer, I unfolded the letter. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm so sorry I can't be there to guide you through what comes next. I'm sorry for a lot of things, actually, but mostly I'm sorry I had to keep secrets from you. I'm sorry I couldn't be honest about everything while I was alive. I'm sorry I protected you by keeping you in the dark. But I need you to understand I've spent the last 5 years making sure you'll never be at anyone's mercy. Not even our sons. I love Patrick. He's my son and I'll always love him. But I've watched him make choices that worried me. The gambling started when he was in college, did you know that? He hid it well. I thought it was just a phase, something he'd grow out of. But it never stopped Sarah. It got worse. Every time he asked me for money for investments, for business opportunities, for emergencies, I gave it to him. Because I'm his father and I wanted to help. But I also documented everything. Every loan, every broken promise, every lie. And Amanda, well, you know my feelings there. She saw us not as family, but as resources. Assets to be managed and eventually liquidated. 3 years ago, when Patrick first mentioned that we should think about downsizing, I knew what was coming. I knew that eventually they'd try to push you out. Take everything we built, leave you with nothing. So I made a plan. The accounts on that list, they're yours. Only yours. I've been systematically protecting our assets, restructuring everything to ensure that you'd be financially independent no matter what happens. The business isn't sold, Sarah. It never was. Henderson Construction is alive and thriving, and it's yours now. Margaret Sullivan can explain everything. The house? Well, that's complicated, but you own it. Not Patrick. You. And I've made sure that even if the worst happens, you'll be taken care of. I know this is overwhelming. I know you're probably angry with me for not telling you sooner, for handling everything myself. But Sarah, you are stronger than you've ever believed. You've just never had to be. I made sure you never had to be. Now you do. And I know you can. Helen Patterson will walk you through the financial details. Margaret Sullivan will explain the business structure. And there's one more thing, something I've been preparing for you for the last 3 years. Ask Margaret about the cottage. I love you more than I've ever found words to express. You made my life worth living. Every day with you was a gift. Don't let guilt or obligation cloud your judgment. You've earned every penny of what I'm leaving you through 34 years of partnership, through loving me when I didn't deserve it, through raising our son even when he disappointed us both. You are not just living anywhere. You are the owner of your own life, your own future, your own choices. Be strong, my love. Be fierce. Be the woman I always knew you were, even when you couldn't see it yourself. All my love forever and always. Robert P.S. Remember that summer in Mendocino when you said you wanted to wake up to ocean sounds every morning? When you stood on that bluff and talked about feeling free, I took care of that too. Ask Margaret about the cottage. It's waiting for you. I don't know how long I sat there. Robert's letter in my hands, tears streaming down my face. He'd known. All this time he'd known what was coming. He'd seen Patrick's trajectory, Amanda's calculations. He'd watched our family fracturing, and instead of denying it, he'd built a fortress around me. I read the letter 3 more times, memorizing every word. Each reading revealed something new, his fear, his love, his strategic mind working even as his heart was breaking. The accounts on that list, the business that supposedly didn't exist, the cottage he'd never mentioned. She knows everything, the sticky note said. Trust the process. I looked at Helen Patterson's business card. First National Bank opened at 9 a.m. It was 3:47 in the morning, 5 hours and 13 minutes until I could start getting answers. I went to the kitchen and made coffee the strong kind Robert liked, not the decaf I'd switched 2 years ago. If I was going to be awake anyway, I might as well be alert. As I sat at the kitchen table watching the sky slowly lighten through the windows, I thought about Amanda's words at dinner. Now that Robert's dead, you need to grieve, pack your bags, and move on. 2 weeks should be enough time. You were just living here. 2 weeks. They'd given me 2 weeks to dismantle my life and disappear quietly into whatever senior facility they'd selected. But Robert had given me something else. Something they didn't know about. He'd given me weapons. At 8:47 a.m., I was showered, dressed in my best Navy suit, the one I'd worn to Robert's memorial, and sitting in my car in the parking lot of First National Bank, waiting for them to unlock the doors. My phone buzzed. A text from Amanda. Patrick and I found a realtor. She's very good, specializes in the neighborhood. We'd like to get photos scheduled for this weekend. Can you make sure the house is presentable? I stared at that text for a long moment. Then I turned off my phone and walked into the bank. First National Bank looked the same as it always had, marble floors, high ceilings, the hushed atmosphere of money being managed. I'd been here dozens of times over the years, usually waiting in the car while Robert went in to take care of things. He'd always said banking was boring, that I'd be more comfortable waiting with a book or running errands. Now I understood he'd been protecting me from knowledge I'd need later. Can I help you? A young woman at the reception desk smiled pleasantly. I'd like to speak with Helen Patterson, please. I have an appointment. I didn't actually have an appointment, but something in Robert's note made me think I wouldn't need one. Your name, Sarah Henderson. My husband was Robert Henderson. The young woman's expression shifted immediately, recognition, sympathy. Oh, Mrs. Henderson, I'm so sorry for your loss. Mr. Henderson was such a gentleman. Let me get Helen for you right away. She disappeared through a door behind the desk. I stood in the lobby, my purse clutched tightly, trying to look more confident than I felt. Helen Patterson appeared almost immediately, a woman in her late 50s, with steel gray hair cut in a professional bob-kind eyes behind tortoiseshell glasses and a handshake that was both warm and firm. Mrs. Henderson, her voice was gentle. I've been expecting you. Please come to my office. I've been expecting you. Robert had arranged this. Of course he had. Helen's office was comfortable, not ostentatious, but solid. Family photos on the desk, diplomas on the wall, a window overlooking Market Street. She gestured to a chair across from her desk and closed the door behind us. First, let me say how sorry I am about Robert. Helen began settling into her chair. He was one of our most valued clients, and more than that, he was a good man. He spoke about you constantly. Thank you, I managed. I found Robert left me your card. I thought he might. Helen turned to her computer, fingers moving across the keyboard. He gave me specific instructions about what to do if you came in. He wanted to make sure you understood your complete financial picture. My heart was hammering. I'm afraid I don't understand much about our finances. Robert always handled... I know. Helen's voice was kind but knowing. He told me. He said you trusted him to manage things and he wanted to honor that trust while you were together, but he also wanted to make sure you'd be protected afterward. She pulled up something on her screen and her eyebrows rose slightly. Let me start by asking, when's the last time you reviewed your accounts with Robert? I don't think I ever did. We had a joint checking account for household expenses. I knew about that one, but Robert handled everything else. Helen nodded slowly. That's what I thought. Mrs. Henderson, Sarah, may I call you Sarah? Please. Sarah, I need to show you something, and I need you to understand that everything I'm about to tell you is completely legal, properly documented, and structured specifically for your protection. She turned her monitor so I could see it. Let's start with the accounts we have on file in your name. The screen showed a list, a long list. Henderson Joint Checking, $28 for 2026. Henderson Joint Savings, $145, $280.44. Those two I knew about. Or at least I'd known we had accounts. I'd never seen the balances. But below them, Sarah Henderson Personal CD number 1, $180,000. Sarah Henderson Personal CD number 2, $165, $500. Sarah Henderson Money Market, $218,300. Henderson Construction Family Trust, $2, $147,000. I stared at the numbers. They didn't make sense. They couldn't be right. I don't understand, I whispered. I didn't open these accounts. Actually, you did. Helen pulled out a file folder, opened it carefully. Here are the signature cards. That's your signature dated and witnessed. She was right. There was my signature dated 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 7 years ago. Different dates on different cards, but all definitely my handwriting. I don't remember signing these. You signed them when you came in with Robert for other banking business. Do you remember coming in to update your address when the city changed the street numbering system? That was 5 years ago. You signed several documents that day. I did remember that, vaguely. Robert had said we needed to update our address on all the accounts. I'd signed what he'd put in front of me, trusting him completely. He told me they were routine updates, I said slowly. They were legitimate signatures, Sarah. Nothing illegal or forged. Robert simply consolidated a lot of business into single visits, and you trusted him enough not to read everything carefully. I felt a wave of emotions, gratitude that Robert had protected me, anger that he'd kept secrets, shame that I'd been so naive, relief that I wasn't destitute. The trust account, I said, pointing to the largest number. What is that? Helen's expression grew more serious. That's the Henderson Construction Family Trust. It's the primary operating account for your late husband's construction business. It's been receiving regular deposits for the past 5 years, profits from the business operations. But Patrick told me the business was sold. He said Robert barely broke even, that there was nothing left. I stopped, the implications crashing over me. Helen's silence was answer enough. The business wasn't sold, I said, my voice barely audible. No, it was restructured, transferred into a family trust, with you as the sole beneficiary. The room tilted slightly. I own the construction business. The trust owns it. You control the trust. So yes, effectively you own it. Helen pulled out more papers. Here are the last 5 years of profit and loss statements. As you can see, Henderson Construction has been quite profitable under its current management structure. I looked at the numbers, my eyes struggling to focus. Annual profits ranging from $380,000 to $425,000 for 5 years. Robert told Patrick the business was struggling, I said. He told our son there was nothing left. I can't speak to what Robert told your son, Helen said carefully. I can only tell you what the financial records show. And Sarah, there's one more account you need to know about. It's more recent, opened 18 months ago. She showed me another line on the screen. Henderson Home Equity Line, $425,000. 0, dispersed to trust. What is this? Your house in Pacific Heights is worth approximately $2.1 million. 18 months ago, Robert took out a home equity line of credit for $425,000. The funds were immediately transferred to the Henderson Construction Family Trust account, your account. So the house now has $425,000 in debt against it, but you have that $425,000 in liquid assets. My mind was racing, trying to understand. Why would he do that? Helen's expression was gentle, but knowing. Sometimes clients with complex family situations take steps to protect one spouse from pressures. If, for example, someone were to inherit a house but not realize it came with a substantial mortgage, and if the funds from that mortgage were held separately by the other spouse. She trailed off meaningfully. I understood. God help me, I understood exactly what Robert had done. He'd made it so that Patrick would inherit a house with debt while I held the cash. I need to see Margaret Sullivan, I said. My voice sounded strange, distant. The accountant. I thought you might. I took the liberty of calling her this morning when I saw you'd arrived. She's expecting you at 11 a.m. Her office is on Polk Street. I've written down the address. Helen handed me a card with directions. Thank you. I stood up, my legs unsteady. Sarah, Helen stopped me at the door. Robert loved you very much. Everything he did was to protect you. But he also believed in you. Believed you were strong enough to handle this when the time came. Don't prove him wrong. I nodded, not trusting my voice. In my car, I sat for a long time just breathing, trying to process what I'd learned. I wasn't destitute. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't at Patrick and Amanda's mercy. Robert had made sure of it. My phone, I'd turned it back on, buzzed with new texts. Amanda, the realtor, can do a walkthrough this weekend. Saturday at 10. Patrick, Mom, we need to talk about moving logistics. Have you looked at any of those places Amanda sent you? Amanda, also we should discuss what furniture you'll be taking. Most senior apartments are small, so you'll need to downsize significantly. They were so confident, so certain they were in control. They had no idea that their careful plans were built on a foundation of lies and assumptions. And I hadn't even talked to the accountant yet. I started the car and drove toward Polk Street, toward Margaret Sullivan's office, toward the next piece of Robert's carefully constructed puzzle. 2 weeks, Amanda had said. 2 weeks to pack up and disappear. But I was beginning to think I wouldn't be going anywhere at all. Morrison and Associates occupied the second floor of a modest building on Polk Street, tucked between a coffee shop and a vintage bookstore. The kind of place you'd walk past 100 times without noticing. Which I supposed was exactly what accountants preferred: anonymity, discretion, the quiet management of other people's money. I was 15 minutes early, so I sat in my car and reread Robert's letter one more time. The part about Margaret Sullivan, she can explain everything. Everything felt like a very large word. At 10:58, I climbed the narrow stairs to the second floor. The office was small, but organized filing cabinets lined one wall, a modest reception area with no receptionist, and a door marked M. Sullivan, CPA. I knocked. Come in. A woman's voice, warm but businesslike. Margaret Sullivan was younger than I'd expected, maybe 60, with iron gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of face that suggested she'd seen every financial trick in the book and wouldn't be impressed by any of them. Mrs. Henderson. She stood extending her hand. Her grip was firm, confident. I'm so glad you're here. Helen called me this morning. Please sit down. Her office was cluttered in the way that suggested actual work rather than neglect stacks of ledgers, a computer with multiple monitors, a whiteboard covered in numbers and calculations. But she cleared a space for me at her desk with practiced efficiency. First, Margaret said, settling back into her chair, let me say how sorry I am about Robert. I've been handling Henderson Construction's books for 15 years, and he was one of the best clients I've ever had. Honest, meticulous, and always paid on time. Thank you. I set my purse down carefully, trying to project a calm I didn't feel. Helen told me you've been managing the business accounts. That's right. And I've been waiting for this meeting for quite some time, actually. Robert gave me very specific instructions about what to tell you if when you came to see me. She pulled out a thick file folder. He wanted you to understand the complete picture, so let's start with the basics. What has Patrick told you about Henderson Construction? The directness of the question caught me off guard. He said Robert sold the business years ago, that it barely covered its debts, that there was nothing left. Margaret's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. I see. And you believed him? I had no reason not to. Robert never discussed business with me. He always said it was complicated, boring, that I didn't need to worry about it. Robert was protecting you, Margaret said gently. But not from boredom, from information that might have been extracted from you if certain people had known you possessed it. She turned her computer monitor toward me. Mrs. Henderson, Sarah, may I call you Sarah? Please. Sarah Henderson Construction was never sold. 5 years ago, Robert restructured it. He transferred all business assets into something called the Henderson Construction Family Trust. Let me show you the documentation. She pulled out papers, legal documents with Robert's signature, notary stamps, official seals. I recognized the letterhead of Robert's attorney, James Patterson. The trust structure is fairly simple, Margaret continued. The trust owns the business. You are listed as the primary beneficiary, which means you control the trust. Patrick is listed as a contingent beneficiary, meaning he would only inherit if you died and chose to leave it to him. I stared at the documents, trying to process. So I own the company. Effectively, yes. And Sarah, it's been quite successful. She handed me a spreadsheet. These are the profit and loss statements for the last 5 years. The numbers swam before my eyes. Year 1 net profit, $387,500. Year 2 net profit, $412. 300 year 3 net profit, $398. 800 year 4 net profit, $425. 100 year 5 net profit, $404. 200, over $2 million in profit in 5 years. But Patrick kept asking Robert for money, I said weakly. He said they were struggling, that his business ventures weren't working out, and Robert helped him. Margaret pulled out another folder, this one even thicker. But he documented everything, every single transaction. She spread papers across the desk. Loan agreements, promissory notes, payment schedules, all bearing Patrick's signature. Your husband insisted on treating family assistance as formal business transactions. He said it was the only way to keep things clear, the only way to protect everyone involved. I picked up the first document, dated 3 years ago. Promissory note. Principal $25,000, purpose investment in tech startup, term 24 months, interest 3% annually, borrower Patrick Henderson. Patrick's signature at the bottom, neat and confident. Did he pay this back? I asked, though I already knew the answer. No. He made 2 payments, $500 each, and then stopped. Robert extended the terms twice, lowered the interest rate, restructured the payment schedule. Patrick still didn't pay. Margaret showed me the next loan, and the next, and the next. $25,000 for a tech investment, $35,000 for a business opportunity, $40,000 for an emergency, $22,000 for medical expenses, $15,000 for a real estate venture, $19,000 for home repairs. On and on, document after document. Patrick's signature on every one. How much does he owe? My voice sounded hollow. Margaret consulted her ledger. With principal, accumulated interest, and late fees according to the loan terms, as of last month, the total outstanding balance is $134,280. The number hit me like a physical blow. $134,000. While Patrick was telling us he was struggling, while Amanda was wearing designer athleisure and talking about expanding their family, my son owed the family business, my business, over $134,000. Has he made any payments at all in the last year? I asked. No, not since Robert's diagnosis. Margaret's voice was careful. It's almost as if he knew that once Robert was gone, the debt would disappear. But it doesn't disappear, does it? No, the debt transfers with the business assets. As the new owner of the trust, you have the legal right to demand payment, restructure the terms, or pursue collection. That's your choice. I sat back in my chair, my head spinning. Patrick had lied to me, to both of us, and Robert had known. He'd known and documented it all, building a case file against his own son while still helping him, still loving him. There's more, isn't there? I asked. Robert wouldn't have just kept loan records. Margaret hesitated, then reached for a sealed envelope in her desk drawer. He left this for you. He said you'd know when you were ready to read it. The envelope was marked for Sarah only, private investigator report. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were photos, surveillance photos. Patrick entering the Golden Gate Casino in San Francisco. Patrick at a poker table in Reno. Patrick at a blackjack table in Las Vegas. Timestamps, dates, stakes. A credit report showing gambling debts to 3 different casinos totaling $87,000. There were also bank statements, Patrick's personal accounts obtained somehow by the investigator. Deposits and withdrawals that told a clear story: deposit from Henderson Construction, withdrawal at casino 2 days later, again and again. And text messages. Printed screenshots of conversations between Patrick and Amanda. Patrick got another $15K from Dad. Told him it was for medical bills. Amanda, good. That should cover the visa payment. But we need more for the property taxes. Patrick, I'll ask again next month. He never says no. Amanda, your mom still doesn't know about the house plan, right, Patrick? She's clueless. Dad handles everything. Once he's gone, we just need to move fast. Amanda, 2 weeks. That's all we give her. Any longer and she might start asking questions. The dates on these messages. The most recent was from 4 months ago, when Robert was still alive, when they were already planning to take my house. I couldn't breathe. The office felt too small, too hot. Margaret appeared at my side with a glass of water. Take your time, she said quietly. I drank the water, focusing on the physical sensation, cold, wet, real. Something to anchor me while my world reorganized itself around this new, terrible knowledge. Robert knew all of this, I finally said, and he still gave Patrick money. He did, but he also protected you from it. He made sure that every dollar Patrick took was documented, that every lie was recorded, that when the time came, you'd have the evidence you needed. To do what? Margaret met my eyes steadily. Whatever you want, Sarah. You own the business. You hold the debt. You have the evidence. The question is, what do you want to do with it? I looked at the documents spread across the desk. The loan agreements, the surveillance photos, the text messages. My son's signature over and over on promises he'd never intended to keep. Tell me about the business operations, I said. Robert mentioned someone named Tom Riley in his letter. Margaret's expression brightened slightly. Tom's been managing day-to-day operations for 5 years. He's excellent, reliable, honest, good with the crew. Henderson Construction has a reputation for quality work and fair pricing, and that's mostly because of Tom. Does he know about any of this? The loans, the debt? No. Tom knows the business is profitable, and that he receives a performance bonus tied to net profits. He thinks Robert sold him a partial stake, but it's actually a profit-sharing agreement that you can modify or revoke at any time. And Patrick, has he contacted Tom? Margaret's jaw tightened. Yes, 3 times in the last week. First he called asking about business assets and cash flow. Then he showed up at the job site asking for keys to the office and equipment yard. Most recently he sent an email saying he was taking over management and needed Tom to prepare a complete inventory of all assets. What did Tom tell him? That he'd need authorization from the legal owner before sharing any information. Robert was very clear with Tom about chain of command. If anything happened to Robert, Tom was to wait for instructions from the trust beneficiary, from you. Relief flooded through me. At least someone had been protecting my interests. I'd like to meet with Tom, I said. Soon. I'll arrange it. He's been worried sick, actually. He thought Patrick might shut down the business or sell off the equipment. He's relieved you're finally here. I gathered the documents carefully, stacking them back into their folders. Evidence, proof, ammunition. Margaret, I need to ask you something. What would you do if you were in my position? She considered the question carefully. I'd think about what Robert was trying to teach you. He didn't just leave you money, Sarah. He left you power. The power to make choices, to set boundaries, to demand the respect you deserve. Whether you use that power and how, that's up to you. Patrick is my son. Yes, and you're his mother. But that doesn't mean you're obligated to let him destroy you to save himself. I didn't go home after leaving Margaret's office. Instead, I drove. No destination in mind, just driving through the familiar streets of San Francisco, trying to process everything I'd learned. My son was a gambling addict. My son had been planning to evict me from my home while Robert was still alive. My son owed me not Robert, but me, over $134,000 that he'd never intended to repay. And I hadn't known any of it. I found myself at Land's End, the trail Robert and I used to walk on Sunday mornings. I parked at the overlook and sat watching the Pacific crash against the rocks below. The Marin headlands were visible across the Golden Gate, the bridge's red towers emerging from the fog. My phone buzzed constantly. I'd been ignoring it, but finally I looked. Amanda, Sarah the realtor needs an answer about Saturday. Can you confirm Patrick? Mom, I stopped by the house. You weren't there. Where are you? We need to finalize moving plans. Amanda, also we need to discuss which furniture you're keeping. The antique dining set should stay with the house. It's worth more in place for resale value. Patrick, Mom, please call me back. Amanda is getting stressed about the timeline. Amanda was getting stressed about the timeline, to steal my house and throw me out. I turned off my phone and sat in the silence. Robert's words echoed in my mind. You are stronger than you've ever believed. You've just never had to be." Maybe it was time to find out if he was right. Over the next 3 days, I did something I never thought I'd do. I followed my son. Not all day, not obsessively, but I wanted to see his life understand what was really happening. Wanted to see if the man in those surveillance photos was the same person who called me Mom. Tuesday afternoon, I parked down the street from Patrick's office building in the financial district. Watched him leave at 5:47 p.m., tie loosened, looking exhausted. He walked to a bar on Market Street, not a casino, just a regular bar, and sat alone for an hour nursing 2 beers. He looked miserable. I almost went in. Almost walked up to him and asked what had happened, how we'd gotten here, but I didn't. At 7:15, Amanda texted him. I couldn't see the message, but I saw his reaction, his whole body tensed. He paid his tab and left quickly. Wednesday, I watched him meet with someone at a coffee shop near the Ferry Building. A woman in her 50s, professional looking. They talked for 30 minutes, and Patrick looked increasingly agitated. When she left, he sat there for another 20 minutes, head in his hands. Later, I Googled the woman. Diane Morrison, licensed clinical social worker, specializing in addiction counseling. Patrick was seeing a therapist. Thursday morning, I did something else I never thought I'd do. I drove to the Golden Gate Casino. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly. Maybe just to see the place that had such power over my son. To understand what drew him there, what made him lie and borrow and destroy relationships for the chance to win. The casino was depressing in daylight. Fluorescent lights too bright, the carpet garish, the mechanical sounds of slot machines echoing in the mostly empty space. A few elderly patrons sat at machines feeding in quarters with mechanical precision. The poker room was closed. A bored-looking security guard watched me as I walked through. This was where Patrick had spent the money Robert gave him. Money meant for investments, for medical expenses, for home repairs. This was where $134,000 had disappeared one bet at a time. I left after 10 minutes feeling sick. Friday morning, Margaret arranged for me to meet Tom Riley at a coffee shop in the Mission. Neutral territory, she'd said. Somewhere we could talk freely. I arrived early, ordered chamomile tea I wouldn't drink, and waited. Tom Riley was exactly what I'd imagined from Robert's descriptions. Mid-50s broad shoulders, weathered hands that spoke of decades of physical work. He wore clean work pants and a Henderson Construction polo shirt, and when he saw me, his face broke into a smile that was both relieved and worried. "Mrs. Henderson." He had a firm handshake, calluses rough against my palm. "It's so good to finally meet you properly. Mr. Henderson talked about you all the time. Please call me Sarah, and thank you for coming." We sat, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Tom looked like he was trying to figure out where to start. "I'll be honest with you, Sarah," he finally said. "I've been worried sick since Mr. Henderson passed. Patrick's been calling and emailing saying he's taking over the business, asking for access to everything. But Mr. Henderson told me years ago that if anything happened to him, I should wait for instructions from you. So I've been stalling, but I don't know how much longer I can hold him off." "How many times has Patrick contacted you?" 4 times. First call was 2 days after the funeral. Said he was assessing assets and needed to see the books. I told him I'd need proper authorization. Then he showed up at the job site. We're doing a residential remodel in Noe Valley right now, and asked for the keys to the office and equipment yard. Said he needed to inventory everything. "What did you tell him?" Tom's expression hardened. "I told him the keys stay with me until I get authorization from the legal owner. He didn't like that. Got angry, said I was being insubordinate to the new boss." He paused. "But here's the thing, Sarah. Mr. Henderson never said Patrick would be the new boss. He was very specific. He said, 'Tom, if anything happens to me, you wait for Sarah. Nobody else. Sarah.'" I felt tears pricking my eyes. Robert had trusted Tom, had made him a guardian of the business of my interests, even though Tom didn't fully understand why. "Tom, I need to tell you something. And I need your complete honesty about how you want to proceed." "Okay." I pulled out the trust documents Margaret had given me. Henderson Construction isn't sold. It was transferred into a family trust 5 years ago. I'm the sole beneficiary and trustee. I own the business. Tom stared at the documents, his eyes widening. "Well, I'll be damned." He looked up at me. "Patrick doesn't know. He thinks his father sold the company and left nothing. He thinks he inherited the house, and that's all. But that's not true." "No, it's not true." Tom leaned back in his chair, processing. "Mr. Henderson was always 3 steps ahead of everyone. I knew he was up to something these last few years, the way he restructured everything, the way he'd ask me weird questions about loyalty and trust. Now it makes sense. Margaret says you've been managing operations for 5 years, that the business is doing well. We're doing real well. Steady contracts, good reputation, repeat customers. We're not the biggest construction company in the city, but we're one of the most reliable. People hire Henderson Construction because they know we'll do quality work on time, on budget. And you're happy to continue managing things. Tom's expression became serious. Sarah, I'll be straight with you. I love this work. I love the crew. I love the business. I love that we're building things that last. If you're willing to keep things running the way they are, I'd be honored to continue. And I'll work for you just as loyally as I did for your husband. Even though it means going against Patrick. Ma'am Sarah, I don't work for Patrick. Never have. I work for Henderson Construction. And if you're the owner, then I work for you. I felt something loosen in my chest. An ally. Someone on my side. There's something else you should know, I said. Patrick has been borrowing money from the business for the past 5 years. He owes about $134,000 in unpaid loans. Tom didn't look surprised. I figured it was something like that. Mr. Henderson was always careful about cash flow, always made sure we had reserves. But there were times when Patrick would show up asking about deposits, wanting to know when big payments from clients were coming in. It felt off, like he was monitoring the money. Did he ever ask you directly for money? Once, about 18 months ago. Said he had an investment opportunity and wondered if the business could front him some capital. I told him he'd need to talk to his father. He didn't like that answer. I made notes on my phone. Everything Tom was telling me could be important later. Tom, I want to keep the business operating exactly as it is. I want you to continue managing the crews, handling the contracts, building the reputation Robert worked so hard to create. Can you do that? Absolutely. And if Patrick contacts you again, I tell him to talk to you. He's not going to like that. Tom's smile was grim. I expect not. But Sarah, I've dealt with difficult people my whole career. Patrick's just one more. He paused. Can I ask you something? Of course. Are you going to make him pay back the loans? I thought about that. About Patrick sitting alone in that bar looking miserable. Patrick meeting with an addiction counselor. Patrick's signature on document after document promises he'd never kept. I don't know yet, I admitted. Part of me thinks I should forgive everything, help him start fresh. He's my son. But another part of me thinks he needs to face consequences. Yes. Tom nodded slowly. Mr. Henderson used to talk about that, about the difference between helping someone and enabling them. He said the hardest part of being a parent was knowing when love meant saying no. That afternoon I had one more meeting. James Patterson, Helen's brother, no relation, had been Robert's attorney for 20 years. He'd drawn up the trust documents, handled the business restructuring, and according to his secretary, had been expecting my call. His office was in a building near Union Square, elegant without being ostentatious. James himself was in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of calm, measured demeanor that probably cost $600 an hour. Sarah, he stood when I entered, shaking my hand warmly. I'm so glad you're here. Robert was very specific about when and how I should contact you, and the timing seems to be right. He left instructions. Extensive instructions. Please sit. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. Let me start by saying that your husband was one of the most strategic thinkers I've ever worked with. Everything he did over the past 5 years was designed with one goal: protecting you. So I'm learning. The trust structure, the business arrangements, the home equity line, it's all interconnected. A financial fortress, essentially, and you're standing in the middle of it completely secure. He pulled out a thick binder. This is your complete file. Trust documents, business records, loan agreements, property deeds. Everything you need to understand your position. I looked at the binder, easily 3 inches thick. I've been to the bank and the accountant. They've shown me most of this. I'm sure, but there are a few additional elements I need to make you aware of. First, Patrick has contacted me twice since Robert's death. He wanted to know about the estate, about what he was inheriting. I told him I couldn't discuss details until after probate. What did he say? He was frustrated. Kept insisting that as Robert's son he had a right to information. I reminded him that attorney-client privilege doesn't transfer to family members. James leaned forward. Sarah, he's going to find out eventually that the business and most of the liquid assets are yours. When that happens, he may challenge the trust structure. My stomach clenched. Can he do that? He can try. People contest trusts all the time, usually on grounds of undue influence or mental incapacity. But Sarah, I've been practicing estate law for 35 years. This trust is airtight. Robert was of completely sound mind when he created it. Every document is properly signed, witnessed, and notarized. There's a clear paper trail showing his decision-making process over several years. No court would overturn it. So I'm safe. Legally, absolutely. Emotionally. He gave me a sympathetic look. That's going to depend on how you handle what comes next. They want me out of the house in 2 weeks. I know. Margaret told me. James pulled out another set of documents. Let's talk about the house. You own it outright. Robert transferred sole ownership to you 6 years ago. However, there's a $425,000 home equity line against it, which means the net equity is approximately $1.7 million. Patrick thinks he inherits it. Robert's will does leave his personal property to Patrick, but the house isn't his personal property, it's yours. Has been for 6 years. Patrick has no legal claim to it whatsoever. I felt dizzy with relief. So I can stay? Sarah, you can do whatever you want. It's your house. You could stay there forever, sell it, and buy something else rented out. It's entirely your choice. He paused. But I should tell you that Robert had another plan if you're interested in hearing it. What kind of plan? James pulled out one more document. A property deed dated 3 years ago. Ocean View Cottage, Mendocino County, California. Owner Sarah Henderson, sole proprietor. Purchase price $685,000 paid in full. What is this? 3 years ago, Robert purchased a cottage in Mendocino, paid cash, put the title in your name only. He said you'd always talked about living near the ocean someday, and he wanted to make sure you'd have that option if you wanted it. I stared at the document. 3 years ago, when Patrick had first started talking about us downsizing, Robert had been planning even then. There's a letter, James said gently, handing me an envelope. He asked me to give it to you when you learned about the cottage. I opened it with shaking hands. Sarah, if James is showing you the cottage deed, it means you've learned about everything else too. The business, the accounts, Patrick's debt. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive. But I needed you to discover your own strength. If I'd told you about the money, you would have immediately thought about how to help Patrick. Because that's who you are. You put everyone else first. You always have. But sweetheart, you can't pour from an empty cup. And Patrick has been draining you dry for years, even if you didn't realize it. The cottage is for you. A place where you can breathe, where you can remember who you were before you became someone's wife, someone's mother. Where you can be just Sarah. I bought it after our anniversary trip, remember? When we drove up Highway 1 and you stood on that bluff watching the sunset and you said, someday I want to wake up to this view and have nothing to worry about but what to cook for dinner. I wanted to give you that. The freedom to choose. The freedom to walk away from people who don't value you, even if one of those people is our son. I love Patrick. I always will. But I love you more. And I've learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting someone face the consequences of their choices. The cottage is fully furnished, fully paid for. The property taxes are prepaid for the next 5 years. There's a caretaker who checks on it weekly. All you have to do is drive up there and decide if you want to stay. You don't have to choose right away. But know that the option exists. Freedom exists if you're brave enough to take it. All my love. Robert, I sat in James's office, Robert's letter in my hands, and cried. Not the quiet, controlled tears I'd shed at the funeral. Real sobs, the kind that came from somewhere deep and raw. James quietly handed me tissues and a glass of water, then busied himself with paperwork, giving me space to fall apart. When I finally composed myself, he spoke gently. Robert loved you very much. He gave me a whole life, I whispered. A complete escape plan. And I didn't even know I needed one. He knew, and now you know too. James slid the binder across the desk. Take this home. Read through everything. Think about what you want to do. And Sarah, whatever you decide, you have the resources and the legal right to do it. Don't let anyone, including your son, make you feel guilty for protecting yourself. I drove home in a daze, James's binder on the passenger seat next to me. The sun was setting, painting the San Francisco sky in shades of orange and pink. It should have been beautiful, but I couldn't appreciate it. When I pulled into the driveway, Patrick's car was already there. He was sitting on the front steps looking impatient. When he saw me, he stood up quickly. "Mom, where have you been? I've been trying to reach you all day. You can't just disappear like that. We have things to plan." I got out of the car, slowly gathering my purse and the binder. "I was taking care of some business." "What business?" His eyes landed on the binder, tried to read the label. "What's that?" "Private documents." "Mom, we're family. There shouldn't be secrets." "Shouldn't there?" I looked at him directly. "Patrick, how much money do you owe?" He blinked, caught off guard. How much money do you owe in total? All your debts?" That's not, why would you ask that?" "Because I'm starting to think there are quite a few secrets in this family. And I'd like to understand them before I make any major decisions about my future." Patrick's face flushed. "Look, Amanda and I have some credit card debt, okay? Everyone does. It's not a big deal." "Is that all, just credit card debt?" "Mom, why are you interrogating me? What's going on?" "I'm trying to understand why you need my house so urgently. If it's just about space for a growing family, that's one thing. But if there's more to it..." "There's nothing more to it." His voice rose. "Jesus, Mom, you're being paranoid. This is exactly what Dad was worried about, that you'd get confused, make bad decisions. That's why we need to act quickly before..." "Before what, Patrick?" He stopped, realizing he'd said too much. "Before you do something you'll regret, like making major financial decisions when you're not thinking clearly." The condescension in his voice was stunning, as if I were senile, incompetent, in need of management. "I'm thinking very clearly," I said quietly. "Clearer than I have in years, actually." "Then you'll see that moving is the right choice. Amanda found 3 places, all very nice, much more suitable for someone your age. We can go look at them tomorrow." "I'm not going anywhere tomorrow." "Mom, I need more time, Patrick. To think, to process, to figure out what I want. Your father just died. I just lost my husband of 34 years. I need time to grieve." "You've had time. It's been almost 2 weeks." 2 weeks, I repeated. "Your father and I were together for 34 years, and you think 2 weeks is enough time to grieve, pack up my entire life, and move? I think you're stalling. And honestly, Mom, it's not fair to me and Amanda. We have plans. We need to move forward." "What about what I need?" Patrick looked genuinely confused by the question, as if my needs were irrelevant, as if I existed solely to facilitate his plans. "Look," he said, trying for a softer tone, "I know this is hard, but it's what Dad would have wanted. He'd want you taken care of, safe, not struggling with a house that's too big for you." "How do you know what your father would have wanted?" "Because I'm his son, because I knew him." "Did you..." I looked at him searchingly. "Patrick, when's the last time you had a real conversation with your father? Not asking for money, not making excuses, but really talking to him." He flinched. "That's not fair." "Maybe not, but it's true." I moved toward the door, suddenly exhausted. "I'm going inside. You should go home to Amanda." "Mom, we need to settle this." "Not tonight, Patrick. I'm tired." I went inside and closed the door, leaving him standing on the porch. Through the window, I watched him stand there for a long moment, clearly frustrated, before finally walking back to his car. As his taillights disappeared down the street, I sank onto the couch, hugging the binder to my chest. 2 weeks, Amanda had said. Tomorrow would be day 12, but I wasn't going anywhere, and it was time Patrick and Amanda learned that. The phone rang at 6:47 a.m., 3 days after my confrontation with Patrick on the porch. I'd been awake for an hour already, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee and Robert's binder, memorizing numbers and dates, preparing myself for what I knew was coming. Amanda's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring twice more before answering. "Sarah." Her voice was tight, controlled, the fake sweetness completely gone. "Patrick and I are coming over this morning. We need to talk now." "What time?" 9 o'clock. Be there." She hung up without waiting for my response. I looked at the clock. 2 hours and 13 minutes. I called James Patterson first, then Margaret Sullivan, then Tom Riley. "I need you all at my house by 8:45, I said to each of them. "It's time." They arrived exactly on time, Amanda clicking up the front steps in her heels, Patrick trailing behind, looking like he hadn't slept. Through the window, I watched them pause when they saw the 3 unfamiliar cars in the driveway. Amanda's expression went from confident to wary in an instant. I opened the door before they could knock. "Come in," I said calmly. Everyone's waiting in the living room. Everyone, Amanda's voice was sharp. What is this, Sarah? A business meeting? I led them into the living room where James Patterson sat in Robert's favorite chair, his briefcase on the floor beside him. Margaret Sullivan was on the couch with her laptop open, folders stacked neatly beside her. Tom Riley stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, his weathered face unreadable. What the hell is going on? Patrick stopped in the doorway. Please sit down, I said, gesturing to the two chairs I'd positioned directly across from my team, because that's what they were now, I realized. My team. This won't take long if you cooperate. Amanda's eyes darted between the three strangers, clearly trying to calculate what was happening. Sarah, if this is about the house, we can discuss it privately. We don't need... Yes, we do. I sat down in the chair I'd positioned at the head of the arrangement, the position of authority. You wanted to discuss my living situation, so let's discuss it. Properly, with all the relevant information on the table. I opened the binder, pulled out the first set of documents, and slid them across the coffee table. Then I said calmly, is the Henderson Construction Family Trust, established 5 years ago by my late husband. I am the sole beneficiary and trustee. Patrick picked up the papers, his hands already shaking. Amanda leaned over to read them, her face going pale. What Robert told you about selling the business was not accurate, I continued. Henderson Construction was never sold. It was restructured and placed in a trust, my trust, which means I own it. That's impossible, Amanda whispered. Patrick said Patrick was wrong. I pulled out the next set of documents, 5 years of profit and loss statements. The business has been quite profitable, actually, averaging about $400,000 in annual net profits, all deposited into accounts held in my name. Patrick was staring at the numbers like they were written in a foreign language. But Dad said, he told me the business was barely breaking even. He lied to you, I said, and watched my son flinch. Or more accurately, he protected me by not telling you the truth. There's a difference. Margaret spoke up, her voice professional and cool. I've been the accountant for Henderson Construction for 15 years. Every transaction, every deposit, every profit distribution, all documented and completely legal. Amanda's face was cycling through emotions, shock, anger, calculation. This doesn't change anything about the house. Patrick doesn't inherit the house, James interrupted smoothly. The house was transferred to Sarah's sole ownership 6 years ago. Here's the deed. He slid another document across. Patrick picked it up, his face crumbling as he read it. But the will, he started weakly. Your father's will leaves his personal property to you, James explained. But the house was not his personal property at the time of his death. It was Sarah's, has been for 6 years. So everything, Amanda's voice was barely audible, everything we planned was based on false assumptions, I finished. Yes, the silence that followed was deafening. Patrick looked like he might be sick. Amanda's carefully controlled mask had completely shattered. I could see rage, panic, and something that looked like genuine fear flashing across her face. But why? Patrick finally asked, looking at me with something like desperation. Why would Dad do this? Why would he lie to us? This was the moment I'd been dreading, the moment I'd have to destroy whatever illusions Patrick still held about his relationship with his father. I pulled out the loan documents, all of them, spread them across the coffee table like evidence at a trial. Because of these, I said quietly, over the past 5 years you borrowed $122,000 from the business, Patrick. You signed promissory notes. You agreed to payment schedules. You made promises. Patrick was staring at the documents, his face ashen. You repaid $5,000 total. The current balance with interest and late fees is $134,280. I thought those were gifts, Patrick stammered. Dad never enforced the payment schedules. He never even brought them up. Because he loved you, I said, and my voice broke slightly. Because he was your father and he wanted to help you. But he also wanted to protect me from the consequences of your choices. I pulled out the next item, the private investigator's report. My hands were steady, even though my heart was breaking. He knew about the gambling, Patrick. The casinos, the debts, the lies. He documented all of it. Patrick's face went from pale to red. You hired a private investigator. You spied on me. I didn't. Your father did, 3 years ago. I slid the photos across. Here's you at Golden Gate Casino. Here's you in Reno. Here's you in Las Vegas. Dates, times, amounts wagered. Amanda grabbed the photos, her hands shaking. Patrick, you told me you stopped. You promised you stopped after that intervention. I did stop. Patrick's voice was rising, defensive. I mean, I tried to stop. I've been trying. By borrowing money from your father and gambling it away. I pulled out the bank statements showing deposits from Henderson Construction, followed by withdrawals at casinos. This is from 8 months ago, Patrick, long after you supposedly stopped. But I wasn't finished. There was one more piece of evidence, and it was the one that hurt the most. I pulled out the printed text messages. These are from your phone, I said quietly. Conversations between you and Amanda about your plans for me. I read them aloud, my voice steady despite the pain. Got another $15K from Dad. Told him it was for medical bills. Good. That should cover the visa payment, but we need more for the property taxes. I'll ask again next month. He never says no. And then the one that truly broke my heart. Your mom still doesn't know about the house plan, right? She's clueless. Dad handles everything. Once he's gone, we just need to move fast. 2 weeks. That's all we give her. Any longer and she might start asking questions. The silence that followed was absolute. Patrick was openly crying now, his face in his hands. Amanda looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. These messages, I continued, my voice barely above a whisper, are from 4 months ago, when your father was still alive. You were already planning to take my house, to evict me, before Robert was even gone. Mom, Patrick tried to speak, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished. I pulled out the final documents, the trust structure, the cottage deed, the complete financial picture. Your father spent 5 years building a fortress around me, Patrick, making sure that no matter what you did, no matter what choices you made, I would be safe, protected, independent. I looked at Amanda. You said I was just living in my house, that I needed to grieve, pack my bags, and leave. You gave me 2 weeks. Amanda couldn't meet my eyes. But this house is mine. The business is mine. The assets are mine. Your father made sure of it. I stood up, drawing myself to my full height. So here's what's going to happen. You have 30 days to remove any personal items you may have stored here. After that, I'm changing the locks. Mom, please, Patrick started. The debt stands, I continued, my voice stronger now. You owe Henderson Construction $134,280. Margaret will draft a payment schedule. You can either adhere to it or I'll be forced to pursue legal collection. That decision is yours. We can't afford that, Amanda said, her voice breaking. We're already drowning in debt. Then you'll need to make different choices. Get help, face consequences, grow up. I looked at Patrick. I love you. You're my son and I will always love you. But love doesn't mean enabling your destruction. Your father understood that. It took me longer to learn. Patrick was sobbing now, really sobbing. I'm sorry. God, Mom, I'm so sorry. I never meant, I know you didn't mean for it to go this far, but intentions don't erase actions. I felt my own tears threatening, but held them back. When your father died, you saw an opportunity instead of a loss. You saw assets instead of a grieving parent. That's what hurts most, Patrick. Not the money. The fact that you couldn't see me as a person who needed compassion. Amanda stood abruptly. This is insane. We'll contest the trust. We'll sue. You can't just... Actually, she can, James said calmly. Everything Robert did was completely legal and properly documented. You're welcome to consult your own attorney, but I can assure you that any legal challenge will fail, and it will be expensive. Amanda looked at Patrick, clearly waiting for him to do something, say something. But Patrick just sat there, broken, unable to meet anyone's eyes. I think we're done here, I said quietly. Tom, Margaret, James, thank you for coming. Patrick, Amanda, you know where the door is. They left, Amanda first storming out with her heels clicking angrily on the hardwood. Patrick lingered, standing in the doorway, looking at me with red, swollen eyes. Mom, I don't know how to fix this, he said, his voice hoarse. Neither do I, Patrick. I felt infinitely tired. But we can't even start until you're honest. With yourself and with me. He nodded, tears still streaming down his face, and left. Tom, Margaret, and James stayed for another 30 minutes, making sure I was all right, confirming next steps. Tom would continue managing the business. Margaret would draft the payment schedule for Patrick's debt. James would handle any legal challenges if they arose. After they left, I sat alone in the living room, my living room in my house. and finally let myself cry. Not for the confrontation, but for the family I'd thought I had, the son I'd thought I knew, the future I'd imagined that would never exist. But underneath the grief, there was something else, something new and unfamiliar. Relief. I didn't have to pretend anymore, didn't have to be smaller than I was, didn't have to let people treat me like I was disposable. Robert had given me permission to be strong. Now I had to learn how to use that strength. 2 weeks later, I drove north on Highway 1, the Pacific, stretching endlessly to my left, the coastal mountains rising to my right. I'd packed a single suitcase, just enough for a few days, and left San Francisco without telling anyone where I was going. The cottage was exactly where James's directions said it would be, perched on a bluff overlooking the ocean, surrounded by cypress trees and wild coastal grasses. White clapboard siding, blue shutters, a wraparound porch with rocking chairs facing the water. The key was under the third flower pot, just like the caretaker's note had said. Inside, everything was perfect. Cozy furniture in soft blues and grays. A fireplace with wood already stacked beside it. A kitchen with windows framing the ocean view. A bedroom with a bed covered in a white down comforter. And on the kitchen table, one more letter from Robert. Sarah, if you're reading this at the cottage, you made it. You stood up for yourself. You found the strength I always knew was there. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. I need to tell you something I never had the courage to say while I was alive. I enabled Patrick's gambling. I gave him money when I should have given him boundaries. I was afraid of losing his love, so I lost his respect instead. My hope is that by protecting you, I'm also helping him. Sometimes people don't grow up until they have to. Maybe losing everything he took for granted will save him. Or maybe it won't. Either way, you deserve to be safe. This cottage is your reward for 34 years of being the best partner anyone could ask for raising Patrick even when it was thankless, for being you. One more thing, check the garage. All my love, forever, Robert. I walked to the small detached garage, my hands shaking. The door was unlocked. Inside, covered by a tarp, was a car. I pulled off the tarp and gasped. A 1965 Ford Mustang, candy apple red, completely restored. The same model, the same color as the car Robert had driven on our first date 46 years ago when we were just kids, and the whole world felt possible. I opened the driver's door. The keys were in the ignition. And on the passenger seat, one final note. Drive it with the top down and feel free. R. I sat in that car in that garage and cried until I had no tears left. Then I started the engine. It roared to life immediately, and I drove. Down the coastal highway with the wind in my hair, past rocky cliffs and crashing waves through tiny towns where no one knew my name. I drove until the sun started setting, painting the sky in impossible colors. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt free. I stayed at the cottage for 2 weeks. Long enough to learn its rhythms, the way the morning fog rolled in the sound of the foghorn from the lighthouse, the paths through the cypress groves where deer came to graze at dusk. Long enough to remember who I was before I became someone's wife, someone's mother. Before I learned to make myself smaller, to make other people comfortable. I'd been a dancer once in college. I'd wanted to be a teacher. I'd had opinions about politics and art and literature opinions I'd gradually stopped sharing because Robert found them charming, but Patrick found them embarrassing, and Amanda found them irrelevant. I'd forgotten that I liked spicy food and loud music, that I could spend hours reading without guilt, that I didn't need to check on anyone or worry about anyone or accommodate anyone's schedule but my own. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be Sarah, not just Patrick's mother or Robert's wife. On my last morning at the cottage before driving back to San Francisco, I received an email from a woman named Linda Morrison, Margaret's daughter. She ran a support group for women dealing with financial manipulation by family members. Dear Sarah, it read, my mother told me a bit about your situation with your permission. I'm starting a monthly group for women who've had to set boundaries with adult children or other family members. Would you be willing to speak at our first meeting? Your story could help others find the courage to stand up for themselves. I stared at that email for a long time. 6 weeks ago, I'd been sitting in my car outside a cemetery afraid to go home, afraid of empty rooms and a future that felt like nothing but loss. Now someone was asking me to help other women find their strength. I typed my reply, yes, I'd be honored. It came 4 months after that confrontation in my living room. 4 months during which Patrick had made exactly 2 payments on his debt, $1,000 each time, barely covering the monthly interest. 4 months during which Amanda had filed for separation. Patrick had sent 3 long emails I hadn't responded to. Tom had successfully completed 2 major projects, increasing the business's reputation. 4 months during which I'd spoken at Linda's support group twice, started volunteering at a women's financial literacy program, and learned to make my grandmother's pasta sauce from memory. I was having my morning coffee on the cottage deck when my phone rang. Patrick's name on the screen. I'd ignored most of his calls, but something made me answer this one. "Hi, Patrick." Silence on the other end. Then, "Hi, Mom." His voice sounded different, quieter, more uncertain. "I'm calling from a meeting," he said. "Gamblers Anonymous. It's my 91st day." My hand tightened on the phone. "That's good, Patrick. That's really good. I've been going 3 times a week. I have a sponsor. I'm working the steps." He paused. "I've also been seeing the therapist. The one you saw me with before I didn't know you'd seen me, but Margaret mentioned you'd been watching." I needed to understand, I said quietly. "I get it now. Why you did what you did. Why Dad did what he did." Another long pause. "Amanda and I are getting divorced. She couldn't handle me actually facing my problems instead of pretending they didn't exist. Turns out she liked the version of me that chased money more than the version that's trying to be honest." I didn't know what to say to that. "I've made a payment plan with Margaret," he continued. 15 years. It'll take me 15 years to pay back what I owe you. But I'm going to do it. Every cent." "Patrick, no, I need to say this. I need you to know that I understand what I did. How I treated you. What I said to you when Dad died. Mom, I saw you as an obstacle instead of a person. I saw your house, your life, your security as things I could take to solve my own problems, and that's unforgivable." Tears were streaming down my face. "It's not unforgivable, Patrick. It's going to take time." "I know. And I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not even asking for a relationship. I wanted you to know that I'm trying. That I'm finally trying to be the person you and Dad deserve to have as a son." I looked out at the ocean, at the morning sun turning the water gold, and thought about Robert's letter. About how sometimes the greatest act of love is letting someone face the consequences of their choices. "Would you like to have coffee sometime?" I asked. "Just coffee. Just talking. No expectations, no agendas. Just seeing if we can find a way to know each other again." I could hear the emotion in his voice when he answered. "I'd like that. I'd really like that, Mom. I'm at the cottage right now, the one your father bought. I'll be back in San Francisco next Tuesday. There's a cafe on Fillmore Street near the house. Pete's Coffee. Do you know it? I know it. Tuesday at 2. I'll be there." After we hung up, I sat for a long time watching the waves crash against the rocks below. I didn't know if Patrick and I could rebuild a relationship. I didn't know if his recovery would last. I didn't know if the hurt between us could ever fully heal, but I knew I was strong enough now to find out. Strong enough to try. Strong enough to set boundaries and keep them even with my own son. Robert had given me that. The fortress he'd built wasn't just made of money and legal documents. It was made of knowledge of my own worth, my own strength, my own right to be treated with respect. 6 months after Robert's death, I stood on the cottage deck, watching the sunrise, a cup of coffee warming my hands. The Pacific stretched endlessly before me, and I understood now why Robert had bought this place. It wasn't just about the ocean view or the peaceful solitude. It was about giving me a place where I could remember who I was when I wasn't defined by my relationships to other people. I split my time now between San Francisco and Mendocino. In the city, I oversaw Henderson Construction, learning the business-building relationships with clients, understanding what Robert had created. Tom and I made a good team. The company thrived. In Mendocino, I was just Sarah. I drove the Mustang with the top down. I walked on the beach. I read books and cooked elaborate meals for one, and didn't apologize for taking up space. Patrick and I had coffee every other Tuesday. Sometimes the conversations were stilted, careful. Sometimes they flowed easily. We were learning each other slowly, like acquaintances becoming friends rather than a mother and son rediscovering their bond. He was on day 187 of sobriety. He'd gotten a job as the project manager for a small firm, nothing glamorous but honest work. He lived in a studio apartment in the Sunset District and took the bus to work. He was learning to live within his means. Some weeks he made his loan payment on time. Some weeks he didn't. But he was trying, and that was more than I'd had from him in years. Amanda had moved to Los Angeles. I heard through Patrick that she'd started dating someone wealthy, a tech executive. I hoped she'd be happy. I hoped she'd find whatever she'd been looking for when she'd tried to push me out of my own life. But mostly I didn't think about her at all. I thought about the support groups I spoke at helping other women understand that financial independence wasn't selfish. It was survival. I thought about the women I'd met who'd been erased from their own lives, who'd been told they were burdens, who'd been made to feel small. I told them about Robert's fortress, about how love could look like protection, even when it felt like secrets, about how strength wasn't something you either had or didn't have. It was something you discovered when you finally needed it. And I told them what Robert had written in his last letter to me. You are not just living anywhere. You are the owner of your own life, your own future, your own choices. The inheritance Robert left me wasn't the money, though that mattered. It wasn't the business or the houses or the Mustang, though those gave me freedom. The inheritance was the knowledge that I was worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth taking up space in the world. And that was something no one could ever take away from me again. I set down my coffee cup and walked to the garage. The Mustang gleamed in the morning light. I climbed in, started the engine, and headed out to the coastal highway. The wind caught my hair as I drove silver now, but still mine. The ocean roared beside me. The sun warmed my face. I was 72 years old, and I was just beginning to understand what freedom felt like. Somewhere I hoped Robert was smiling.